Welcome everyone to this year's edition of Inside the MAAC. With March starting up, it's only right to get some tournament debate. I'm Emily Sweeney, and alongside me is the rest of the women's basketball beat staff, Brittney Braun-Lieben, Keenan Mills, and Nick Boyd. And we have so much to discuss on Inside the MAAC. Now guys, with Atlantic City right around the corner, let's take a quick look at the playoff bracket. Looking at this right now as it comes up onto the screen, how do you guys feel about these matchups?
I think it's easy to say that, like, looking specifically at the Quinnipiac side of things, I think it's kind of easy to say that St. Peter's is going to drop that game against Manhattan. They haven't won a game all conference season. Quinnipiac has beaten Manhattan by 14 both times that they've played them. So I think it's easy to say that the Bobcats are probably going to move on to the semifinals. It's just the other side of the bracket where it gets a little iffy.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting games in the quarterfinal round is obviously going to be Siena-Fairfield. These are two kind of even teams. Siena does have the season series against them, so I think that they're kind of the projected favorites in that one. And it should be a really, really good tournament so far.
Yeah, Iona's been like a hard team to play against, and I think they're going to go to the championship based off the bracket they have. They beat Siena, they beat Fairfield, and I think they just have an easy way to go.
So guys, looking at the first round there, Mount St. Mary's versus Canisius, Mary's first Rider, Manhattan, St. Peter's. Keenan, you touched on St. Peter's not really having a chance, but do you see any upsets happening in that first round before we get to the quarterfinals, Nick?
I think the best team with a chance of getting an upset in that first round is Rider. Like, when the Bobcats played them earlier in the season, they didn't look too bad. They kind of held their own through the whole first half. I think, and Marist has been struggling a lot this season too, so I think Rider's a team to watch in the first round there.
I'd agree with you, Nick. The Bobcats only beat Rider by 5 points. They played them pretty close, so they're a decent side, and I think they might have an upset there.
I agree, yeah.
You agree, Brittney? What do you think about the upsets there? You think there's a chance for some, or you think it's going to be the lower seeds are going to just move on?
No, the only thing I can see is maybe Fairfield versus Siena. Fairfield, as we saw yesterday, they have a tough defense, and a tough defense is hard to beat, so I think they also have a chance at beating Siena.
Yeah, definitely. And now, honing in on Quinnipiac's team, which we know pretty well, heading into AC, have there been many players who have stepped up, and which player do you think is really going to come out of their shell going into Atlantic City and Jersey? Brittney, we'll start with you on this one.
I'm going to have to pick Ella O'Donnell. As we saw yesterday, she had 2 points and 4 assists. She might not always bring the biggest competition to the team, but when she has to step up, she steps up. She hasn't played since January, but when she steps up and plays, she has what she has. She's 37.5 shooting from the field percentage, and I think if she's on, she's on.
Nick, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Mackenzie DeWeese. We've seen her, what she can do in her junior and senior years. She was averaging almost 13 points if you combine those two seasons. This season, she's been averaging about 5.5, 3 boards, but the past few games, she's been stepping it up. She had 11 points against Niagara, 12 against Siena, only 7 against Fairfield, but she had 4 steals in that game. And she has playoff experience. She was a part of that 2019 team. I think that experience is going to kick in once she gets to Atlantic City. I think her leadership qualities are going to make everyone around her better, and she's just not going to get fazed by the big moments. She's going to be able to, get in there, get in her element, and I think she's going to have a really, really good tournament.
All right, so we got O'Donnell, we got DeWeese. What about you, Keenan?
I'm going with Mackenzie Helms. She's coming off the bench, and she is just a really good ball handler. I'm going to argue she was the best ball handler on this Quinnipiac team. She's the only one that can really break the press. We saw it particularly in the Niagara game. There's a lot of good defenses here in the MAAC. In Niagara, they came out with this weird press thing that it really confused the Bobcats, and Helms was the only one to really kind of clear the floor and just kind of collapse that defense.
Yeah, I'm actually going to agree with you, Keenan, on this one. Although I think DeWeese is a good pick and O'Donnell as well, I think when you're talking about coming out of your shell, it's somebody who maybe hasn't done their best yet in this season. I think DeWeese has shown what she's got, and I think O'Donnell in the beginning of the season kind of gave her best. So Keenan, I think I would agree with you on this one just because I think Mackenzie Helms is somebody who has shown in the latter half of the season, specifically these last 2 games, that she's shown that she's coming out of her shell and she's going to continue that in Atlantic City.
Yeah, and the biggest thing with Helms, I think, is her defensive side of the game. Like we saw, especially in that Niagara game, 3 blocks. If you're getting that out of your backup point guard, that's really impressive. If she can have another game like that going into the tournament, maybe second round against that same Niagara team, if they both get there, that could be really huge for the Bobcats.
Yeah, I think if Helm plays her A game as we saw yesterday, she'll definitely go off in the tournament.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And kind of based off what we're talking about, and on that last game especially, and the way this player has already gained stock, I think it has to be Mackenzie Helms. I know you guys had some good picks there, but I'm going to stick with Mackenzie Helms on that one. Now, moving on to the next question. Coming off of the bench, who do you guys think is the star player off the bench for the Bobcats? Nick, you want to start this one?
I'm going to go with Helms. I know Baskerville's the obvious answer, and she should be. She's been the starting caliber player all season. But I'm going to take, kind of like a little of the under here, and because I really like what Mackenzie Helms has been doing. I think she's an X-factor player for this team. She's got the intangibles. If you look at her stat sheet, it's not going to blow you away, but the eye test checks out. She's an offensive spark plug, a defensive spark plug for this team as well. And as Keenan was saying in that Niagara game, she was a big reason they were able to stick in that game and kind of come back late. She was able to break the press. She's quicker and more decisive in different ways than Rose Caverly, and she's forced Niagara to make a bunch of defensive adjustments down the line. And Coach Fabry's talked about the trust she has in her to run the offense in the second team. Obviously, Mary Baskerville is the most impactful player off the bench when you're looking at the stat sheet and with what she can do scoring and on defense. I think Helms has a chance to have not more value, I'll say, but a more understated impact. I think mentioning, we need to talk about her because of the intangible value that she brings to this team and the depth that she allows Trish Fabry to kind of play with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she's the most valuable player personally. I don't
That's
think
fair.
you can go against Mary Baskerville at all coming off the bench. The numbers just don't match up, and I don't know. What do you think, Keenan, Brittney?
I agree with you. Mary Baskerville is the ultimate six-man. She's the big that they need in the game. She's the game changer. She has had 39 blocks this season, 36 steals, and when she's on the court and she's on her A game, she can make the shots, she makes assists, she can be anything you need on the court. Not like Mackenzie Helms, who kind of just is the point guard.
Well, she's not just the point guard, I don't think. I think she's, the leader.
Score.
She doesn't need to score
because
she finds her open teammates. She'll pass it off to the open man, which can be Baskerville.
But I think that's a game
lot.
changer. I think most of the people that are on the depth of that bench can do what Helms does. I think the game changer is having that big man in the middle, getting the ball, getting the rebounds and the block.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Baskerville's not a game changer. She's absolutely been. She's been one of the best players for the Bobcats all season. I just think Mackenzie Helms' value is so understated.
All right,
that
but who would you rather have
in the game? So
both of them same time. Why is
No,
that?
that's not the question.
They're both on the bench. They're both on the bench units. You're going to get Helms running the ball, distributing the ball,
But they don't go in at the same time. Usually the first
Keenan,
sub is.
Keenan, we haven't heard from you. What are you thinking on this?
Nick, I know I've just spent the first part hyping up Helms, but how can you just not see Baskerville's presence as the best coming off the bench? Helms is really important to this team, but Baskerville, she's just as good as a center that goes in. Helms, there's a little bit of a drop-off at each possession level coming off the bench, and Baskerville is maybe a step up from Morris in the starting lineup, and that's the only way that you can look at it.
Yeah, I think Baskerville is a step up from Morris. I think Baskerville goes in, the whole momentum of the game changes. Suddenly, the Bobcats' offense is getting much stronger as soon as Baskerville hits the court. When Helms comes in, you're looking at Helms coming in, and she's not having so much of an impact, especially not as much as Baskerville has.
Helms usually goes in when Rose Caverly has foul trouble or she's tired. She's not she doesn't go in to change the game. She goes in when they need to replace Rose Caverly.
I don't think you were watching the Niagara game. The reason that they switched to Helms in that game was because Rose Caverly was unable to break the press. She was able to use her quickness, and her more decisive ball distribution to break the press. And when they subbed her in that second quarter, they immediately went on a 6-0 run. She was a big part of the spark in that fourth quarter to kind of go on that run to get back in the game. I think that Helms is going to be a big part of this team, especially if they match up against Niagara in the second round. I think she could be due for another huge game.
I don't know, guys. I think you have to go with Mary Baskerville. Helms is only going in scenarios that are very small, and they don't really happen too often where she's going to touch that hardwood. Baskerville goes in almost every single game. She goes in every game, and she changes the momentum every time she hits that hardwood. I just don't think that your argument really stands here, Nick.
Maybe we'll have to agree to disagree on this one.
All right, and now we're going to move on to our next question. With these players coming off the bench, having such great impacts that we can kind of debate on it a little bit, is that depth that Fabry has going to translate to AC in a positive way, and how is that going to affect the team, especially in the tournament? Keenan, do you want to start this one?
We've asked her about this many times before, and she's noted the reason why they've won 12 of the last 13 is because of the depth. And this is gonna be a gritty and grindy tournament, and they're gonna have to use their legs, and they got that. They saw that in the win. They had Morris, LaBarge was out. They had a couple people that weren't playing for them, and they still were able to get those buckets.
Yeah, I think the biggest part of the bench depth that Fabry has is that she's kind of had a fluid rotation all season. We've seen it. It's not the same 10 players each time. She'll kind of go based off the matchup. Like I believe it was the game against Maris where we saw Grace LaBarge kind of come into her own and take a lot of shots and hit those shots. And that was really one of the first games that we really saw her get the ball in her hands and get the green light to shoot the ball. And I think she's a big bench part. Ella O'Donnell, as you mentioned earlier, she's also been a real spark plug scorer. And I think having a bunch of different players with a bunch of different skill sets that you can kind of bring together is huge going into the tournament.
Especially because it's 3 games in 3 days. So having a bench to help come in and sub in, and Fabry says time over time after time that she can trust anyone to step on that court and step into the role. So that's going to play a big impact.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think having that bench depth, especially in a tournament where you are playing 3 games back-to-back, if they get that far, it's going to make a huge difference in how they're playing on the hardwood. She can put anybody onto that court. You saw earlier in the season, she tried switching 5 out for 5, and that wasn't really working out. So they've been working on coming out of the bench, using their depth to their advantage all season. And Fabry mentioned in the last game that she thinks that they really solidified how they're doing that and the best way to rotate them. So I definitely agree with you guys that the bench is going to help them there.
Yeah, and I think another big thing Fabry's talked about is how kind of everybody knows their role and how everybody's kind of become comfortable with their role as the season's gone on. And I think that's another big part of why this bench depth is so important, because no one feels like, oh, I need to try and go beat the person above me or be better than the person behind me. They all know, okay, we're all a team, we're all in this together, and we need to work together, use our strengths to go out and get to the ultimate goal, which in this case is the MAAC championship.
Yeah, it's the next man up mentality. I know we just trashed on you for Helms, but she is able to kind of fill in that role of Caverly if she's maybe lacking or tired of going to the bench.
Exactly.
And do you guys think those other teams in the bracket in Niagara, which would potentially be the semifinal game for the Bobcats, do you think they have a similar depth, or do you think the Bobcats have a depth that's an advantage more than everybody else in their bracket?
I think they have more than an advantage because when we watched Niagara, they didn't have that much of a bench. They have like 4 subs that come in. But Quinnipiac, they will use their entire bench if they need. So I think it's more of an advantage than other teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Because especially with Niagara because we actually saw them in person. They had the 2 stars, the Parker sisters, Angel and Aaliyah Parker, were really getting the ball in their hands and scoring pretty much more than anybody else. No one else on Niagara really had a big impact offensively. And because I think Niagara is really Quinnipiac's most likely quarterfinals opponent, that's the team to pay attention to right now. And Niagara causes a lot of turnovers. They lead the MAAC in turnovers forced. That's going to be very tough for the Bobcats to kind of counter. I think their depth can help with that because, as we saw with Helms and with other players too, they can kind of sub them in, make changes, and force Niagara to make the adjustment.
We saw them in person in the 4th quarter when Niagara came here. They were running the whole game, and Niagara ate it in the 4th quarter because they were probably tired.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly, guys. Now, in the regular seasons, teams are often playing once or twice a week, giving them some rest, some recovery, some practice time before they face their next opponent. In Atlantic City, it could be possible for Quinnipiac to play 3 games in 3 days, which you do not see outside of that tournament. How could this time frame change potentially affect the team? Keenan, do you want to start this one off?
I think it's kind of that depth thing that we just mentioned. There's going to have production from the bench, and that's what we're going to see with this Bobcat team. We saw Michaela Morris in a boot the other day. Grace LaBarge was also out. She wasn't dressing. So they're going to have to get gritty to win a couple games in AC.
Yeah, and I think that depth is definitely going to be a huge asset going into this and having to play so many games back to back to back. If, let's say, LaBarge or Morris or any other player isn't 100% one day, Fabry has someone that she can put in her place that she knows she can trust and that she knows she can get results from.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you too. The depth of the bench is playing a big impact, and 3 days, 3 games, if they can rest some starters when they need it and then have the bench come in, I think they'll be fine.
I'm going to go a little outside the bench depth. Fabry talked in the post-game yesterday. She was talking about how having the 3 games in 3 days, the biggest part of that is the mentality. While she has the depth to kind of battle that, I think it is more focused on the mentality for the 3 days and 3 games in 3 days, because you're playing back-to-back-to-back against opponents, especially as you get into the quarterfinals and the semifinals and the finals if they make it that far. I think you're playing against these opponents that are not necessarily easy to beat. Their opponents, especially Niagara, if that game comes up, they've lost to Niagara twice in the regular season, so these are opponents they're going to have trouble with, and their mentality going into that game after already playing and it being back-to-back, I really think that they have to have a strong mentality going into those matchups, back-to-back games, if they're going to get through in this tournament. But now that we have all seen the bracket, discussed some Quinnipiac women's basketball, what are you guys thinking as far as predictions for the final matchup and a winner? Brittney, why don't you shoot your shot and start this one?
So I think for the championship game, we're going to see Niagara versus Iona. And I think Niagara is going to win it all. Niagara is going to be coming off a 2-game win streak after this. And the two teams are going to be playing Quinnipiac, which again was a close game. And then they're also going to be playing either, I think it's Siena or Fairfield, one of those two teams. And they're going to be having the energy, the impact. And as we saw, Quinnipiac had 35 turnovers the first matchup and 30 turnovers the second matchup. So I think Niagara's defense is going to help them to the win.
Nick, you want to go next on this one?
Yeah, I was really spicy with the Helms take earlier. I'm going to be kind of boring with this one. I got Iona beating Niagara in the finals. Iona, listen, they're not unbeatable. They've lost to a couple sub-500 teams this season, but oh my goodness, they are on I believe they've won 17 of their last 18, something along those lines. And they've beaten a lot of the top teams that they're going to be facing. They've swept Siena, they've swept Quinnipiac, they've swept Niagara. I just don't really see any team being able to dethrone them. Obviously, it's March, so anything can happen. I just don't think that's a likely outcome.
I have Iona beating Quinnipiac in the final. I think Quinnipiac takes on Niagara. I think they beat them. They only lost to them combined through the 2 games that they did lose by 8 points, and they were forcing 65 turnovers through those 2 games, so they played like garbage. I mean, if you can keep it that close while also turning the ball over 30-plus times, it says something. They're preparing for that press defense for the 3rd game this season. I think Fabry's going to have them ready, and then Iona, I think, is going to kind of stomp the Bobcats in the finals.
And that is why I do think Quinnipiac has a really good chance. They are the best defensive team in the conference.
You know, I'm going to go a bit bold here. I'm going to give my take real quick. I think Quinnipiac will face off against Iona, like Keenan said, in the finals. But I think Quinnipiac's going to come out on top in the MAAC. Sure, QU has not beaten the likes of Niagara yet. They lost twice in the regular season. But the Quinnipiac women's volleyball team didn't beat Fairfield once until the MAAC championship, and they went on to the NCAA. And we just saw Colgate women's ice hockey beat Quinnipiac, and they hadn't done that in the regular season, and they did it in the ECAC semifinals. So I have no doubt that Quinnipiac can win the MAAC. And with that, I always like to have the final word. So I think we're just going to head over to a break right now, but stick with us as Dylan Summer and the men's basketball beat team have some insight on the men's chances in Atlantic City. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Inside the MAAC. It's time to switch over to the men's side. I'm Dylan Summer, and I'm joined by men's basketball beat reporters Keith Savage, Beckett Calkins, and Marcel McAdoo. Are you guys ready to discuss your thoughts and predictions for Atlantic City?
Oh yeah, I'm so ready to go. It's going to be a fun tournament.
Should be a good time tonight and a great tournament next week.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get into it, Dylan.
Yeah, let's get right into it with the MAAC tournament. All set for this upcoming week. What are your guys' outlooks for how the bracket's going to unfold this year? Let's start with you, Keith.
So I think that bracket's very interesting. A lot of the underdogs team have been on a hot run. You see Mount St. Mary's and Canisius have been really good. 2 teams are 8 and 9, but they've been successful. I think it could be a tough matchup for Iona. Fairfield, St. Peter's, another good 2 teams that I like in this tournament. But overall, Marist Manhattan is the matchup we care the most for Quinnipiac, because that could be something we could see. I think Marist going to pull off an upset. It could be the opponent Quinnipiac sees, but Fairfield is a sneaky team. That could happen. But I think Ryder holds up. But Fairfield's a team that you have to watch out in that first round.
Keith, I got to say, Mount St. Mary's, Canisius, that's a great first-round matchup. Both teams have been hot lately. Going down the bracket, Fairfield, St. Peter's, I think Fairfield's going to beat them pretty easily. I liked what I saw from Fairfield last week when they played Quinnipiac. And Manhattan, Marist, I know you like the way Marist has been playing. They did beat Manhattan by 20-plus last time they played. But I've got Manhattan. I just think the guard play in that game for Manhattan is going to advance them to the next round.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Beckett. I mean, Manhattan kind of just came out of nowhere at a point in the regular season. Ant Nelson, the last time they visited Hamden, he put up that game winner after the Bobcats blew that double-digit lead. I feel like they may make a deep run here in the playoffs if they keep it up.
Yeah, Manhattan really impressive again. No Jose Perez, who's the preseason MAAC Player of the Year. He's not on the team anymore. He after transferring and losing their head coach a few weeks before the season. Manhattan's been a great story to see.
I think you also got to go ahead and look out for Fairfield or St. Peter's as sort of a dark horse, as we've seen as of late, especially yesterday, St. Peter's taking down Siena in overtime. So anything could go ahead and happen for this upcoming tournament. But as we've seen throughout the season, there have been many players that have stood up to the occasion and come clutch down the stretch of games. With that said, who are your X factors on this Bobcat squad? Let's start with Marcel this time around.
Yeah, I know earlier in the regular season I said my X factor was the graduate student Ike Nweke out of Columbia University. This time I'm going to go with Desi Jones, a point guard, especially during the month of January in the beginning of the calendar year. He averaged 14.4 points per game, as well as 86% from the free throw line. He finished the season being 4th in the conference in free throw percentage, and he's going to be definitely a player to look out for in the postseason.
Yeah, I'll go off. He's a great player, but my guy is Ike Nweke. It's a key reason why all their losses in the MAAC play, Ike Nweke has only had a negative plus-minus once. Every other game's either been 0 or has been positive overall. Ike Nweke is a guy whose defensively his stats aren't all that good, but he's one of the best defenders on the team, arguably the best defender in my opinion. I think as a big man, as a team you're going to see, if you see Maris, you're going to have to guard Patrick Gardner. A lot of these teams have good big men. Ike Nweke is that X-factor guy that you need. His offense is solid, it's starting to go down, his min's starting to go down. But I think if this team is going to have success, Ike Nweke is going to have to be in the ball games. These last 5 games, he hasn't played over 20 minutes at all. That's something that has to change for a big Dunleavy squad, because Ike Nweke is the key X factor here.
Keith, I 100% agree with you. And you just took that, my first line of notes, last 5 games, he hasn't played 20 minutes. Like, that's unbelievable. This is a guy that at the start of the year, he was putting up double-digit scoring numbers in almost every game. Like you said, one of the best defenders on the team. He averages 25 minutes per game, and he hasn't been getting that recently. He needs to play more, and he makes a huge impact when he's in the game. So I agree 100%. It's early in the show, but we'll see if that's a theme tonight, Keith.
I think Nweke and Jones are both good picks, but I'm going to have to go with Tyrese Williams, a guy who's really come on as of late. If you look at what he did against Fairfield was 18-point performance and then 11 points in his last contest as well. He's been getting double digits consistently, and they're going to need point scorers as they go against these teams that, well, they're going to be coming right after them right away. And we saw defense was a big problem for them this season.
Yeah, defense is something that's been interesting to see the last few games, especially against Fairfield. That defense did not look good. Give up 92 points, not even overtime. That's something you have to improve on. The offense hasn't been that bad as of recent, but that defense is something that was the best spot for the team. But now, Fairfield, that was a bit concerning. But this team has answers for it. But overall, like I said, I think Ike Nweke, if he's in the ball game, he's quick enough. Paul Tiano and J.J. Reagan don't have the speed to play against good big men, especially how I expect Maris to be that team they play. If Ike Nweke gets in that early foul trouble like we've seen, it could be an interesting story there.
The Bobcat season has not been all highs as they have struggled throughout the year. As this team prepares for Atlantic City, what struggles need to be addressed before they step on the court next week? Beckett, you start off with this one.
Well, Keith just mentioned one of them, 92 points to Fairfield. I'm going to agree with Keith again, 2 times in a row. The defense, it's the defense. They need to fix the defense. They put up 82 points and lost, and that's just not a recipe for success, really. I mean, I would also have to say blowing leads. We mentioned that against Manhattan. Marcel, you mentioned that. It was a 20-point lead. They blew that as Ann Edwards hit the game winner against Quinnipiac in that game, but it's just that's definitely been a problem for them, blowing leads and the defense. It needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I think their biggest problem has just been blowing those leads, especially down the stretch. I mean, it's quite unacceptable to be winning by over 15 points going into the last 20 minutes of play and then just watching that lead slowly diminish. And they also start to crumble in defense. It just ends up turning into a crapshoot down the stretch, and that's something they really need to look into before going to Atlantic City.
Yeah, I think the big thing is second half adjustment. That's the big thing. They've been blowing leads mostly in the second half. That's where you have to adjust if you want to be a good team in this tournament. If you can't adjust against some of these top coaches, veteran coaches, it could be interesting how that turns out. But I don't see them winning a game in the tournament if they don't adjust. That's the big thing. Say they play Manhattan, which is a possibility. They were up by 21 points in that game, and you blow that lead and lose the buzzer beater. That's unacceptable. You have to come back in that. Fairfield, they've had leads. Every single game, they basically have big leads. They can't be choking that. And mainly it comes out to defense. the communications on the pick and roll has been the main thing for the team that's been struggling. Sometimes I think a zone is okay to go into. You can't go in a zone for an entire game, but a zone is needed sometimes for this team. I think that could step up big time. And Ike Nowacki is a dude that I'm going to keep going back to him, but he needs to be on the court defensively. We can't see under 20 minutes. Otieno is not a quick enough guy to guard some of these dudes, and J.J. Riggins is not tall enough to guard some of these guys.
I think really if you look at any of the areas of defense, one of the biggest things that these teams have been attacking is Desi Jones and his height. What can you guys talk about with the guard play and how they've defended that?
Yeah, Dylan, I'll take that one. I mean, we saw at the end of the Fairfield game when we were there, Baker Dunleavy was going offense, defense with the substitutions, putting Taimu Chenery in. Excellent defender. Taimu was probably the best wing defender on the team, so that was impressive, but you need to value Desi Jones' offense on the offensive side of the ball, so you can't do that the whole game, obviously. Desi Jones has to be in the game because of how talented he is on the offensive end, but Taimu Chenery is a difference maker on the defensive end. And if you want to improve the defense, he does have to play more, I do believe. Marcel, what about you?
Yeah, I'm going to tag along right there with you. Taimu Chenery, he's been having some struggles on the offensive end, I think it's safe to say, this season, but a phenomenal defender nonetheless. And I think Dunleavy's been spending the last few games trying to figure out what clicks, what doesn't click. I think he needs to solidify a defensive setting and an offensive setting and really stick to it throughout the course of the tournament.
Jones, great player, offensive player, defensively. He's also has some success on the steal side, but the main thing is his height. He's not the tallest player on the court, but overall, Taimu Chenery is a great defender. But I think it's more the communication part on this team. Sometimes you see lack of communication going back in the screens. That's the big struggle here. They won't communicate on there, and Coach Dunleavy has not gone his own many a times this year, where I think that has to get adjusted more, especially against a team like Manhattan or Ryder. We've seen success against Ryder, but overall, zone, I think, will be the best thing for this team. But overall, it's been the communication. I think communication has been lacking these last few games for Quinnipiac.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. If you go ahead and look at these last two games in particular, though, it's kind of just like on and off what we're going to get out of those games. Fairfield, they go ahead and lose, but Marist, they go ahead and run all over them. So we'll have to see about that. But going back to last year, the Bobcats made it all the way to the semifinals as the 11th seed before eventually falling to the St. Peter's Peacocks. This year, Quinnipiac find themselves in the third seed, and they will have a first-round bye. With that in mind, do you guys think the Bobcats have a chance to make it further this year than they did last year?
Well, I'll start this one off. I think this team is championship or the losing first game. There's no in between here. This team, in my opinion, is the second most talented team in the conference behind Iona. This team has the talent. It's just, again, the communications overall and the coaching adjustment is a big thing needed for the squad. But overall, I think this team has two things. They're either going to lose the first game to either Marist or Manhattan, or they're going to make it to the MAAC championship. And honestly, I think they could win the MAAC championship. They have that talent to get there. And overall, that's the key thing. That's the one thing they big need is that communication factor if they want to get that far.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's all about communication. It's also all about consistency. There were some certain points throughout the season where the team was very consistent throughout play, and they were winning games. They won 7 out of 8 games in January. They stayed consistent. If they can stay consistent throughout the course of the tournament, as well as getting their communication skills in check, they can make it to the finals, but this season has really been lopsided. We don't know. It's March.
I agree with both you. I think Quinnipiac is also the second most talented team in the MAAC behind Iona. And what you didn't mention, their experience. This is a really experienced team. They've got vets. They've got veteran guards, Desi Jones, Matt Blanc. They've been there. Courtwright, Tyrese Williams. They all played in Atlantic City. They were all on the team when they made that run last year. This isn't a team full of first years. They have the veteran talent. They have the talent. It's just whether they can hold these leads and make the adjustments when they're not exactly clicking. So that's what I'll be looking to see in Atlantic City.
Yeah, again, Quinnipiac's been waiting for this moment. Going back, there's not a single first year on this team. There's 2 sophomores, one's a walk-on, and the one Alexis Wright is starting to get more minutes. But the team has experience. They had 1 goal going into the season and winning the MAAC. They're not in a rebuilding spot anymore. They can't rebuild with the team they have. This team is win or go home.
And Keith, this is a team, they've got shooters. They've got shooters that can get hot. We saw Tyrese Williams put up 18 the other day. Desi Jones, he's a microwave scorer. Matt Blanc has shown he's very capable. They've also got bigs. As we mentioned, Ike Nowacki, he can bang down low with the best of them in the conference. Paul Otieno has had dominant flashes this whole year. So I think what they're really missing is maybe that wing piece. But like if Alexis Reyes can get going, this could be a team that could click at the right time.
I think it all comes down to whether they're making their shots and whether they're playing defense. If they could get those two things to go together, I think they could go ahead and make that push at the MAAC championship. But it's going to be hard getting out of that semifinal round, I think, against Ryder. But Quinnipiac started. They've only swept Marist and Ryder on the season. They split or been swept against other MAAC schools, however. With such high hopes of where this could go, what would be considered a successful run in Atlantic City? Keith, why don't you go first?
I think the only successful run is making the MAAC championship. If they lose in the first round, that's a huge disappointment. I think we could see a whole new roster next year. That's a story for another time. But overall, I think this is going to be an interesting turnout for the team. They have to make the MAAC championship. There's no in between. They have to make it. Making it successful, winning it would be so much better. But overall, if they lose in this first game, this season is a major failure. There's no question if they lose that first game. They have to make the championship. Even losing a Ryder, I still think the season's a failure. That's the main thing. They have to make the MAAC championship. No first years on this team, 2 sophomores. There's one goal on the team, that's making the MAAC championship.
Keith, I took it even a level further. I didn't even just say make the MAAC championship. I said win the MAAC championship. I think if you get there and lose to Iona, sure, you made a run, but you didn't win it. And that's the second year in a row it would be, if that happened, that you would make a run and then lose in the later round of the tournament. So I think I would have to say that you have to win the championship in order to call this a truly successful season. That's the goal coming into this season. If they accomplish that, that's a successful year. Marcel, what about you?
They're a championship team. They really are. They have all of the tools necessary to win a championship in this conference. It just comes down to consistency, and it comes down to turnovers, it comes down to free throws, it comes down to the little things with this team. And with the experience they have, they can get all of those little things in check, but they need to get up and off the ground running. I think it's championship or bust as well, because they have the talent to win the championship.
And the biggest thing I think about this team now, with the experience and everything that they've got through these last couple of years, a lot of those guys are leaving, so this is their last chance to go ahead and make that run for the MAAC title. And they've beaten Iona before, they've beaten Ryder before, and they've also beat Siena. So all the top 3 teams they have beaten, and it would just be a big letdown for them if they can't get at least to the MAAC championship and even win it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, too, if this team loses first round, this could be a transfer portal heavy team. But a lot of guys who get upset here and say, hey, it's my senior year, let's try something out. Maybe this team can make a run in their conference. That's what this team could be like. That's how important I think this season, this tournament run is going to be. I think legitimately is going to be fine next season. If this team fails, I think transfer portal heavy for this team. I could be wrong, but I think that's what it's going to be like. The teams will be upset if they lose that game.
Well, it's now time for the moment everyone has been waiting for, our predictions for the MAAC tournament. Who do you guys see taking it home in the end? Marcel, you start off.
I see the Iona Gales taking it in the end. At the end of the day, the last 10 minutes I've been talking about consistency, and this team has just been the most consistent throughout the course of the season. Also, like the women's beat reporters said, this will come down to stamina at a certain point. Playing back-to-back-to-back games takes a toll on guys. And we've had a few back-to-back games with the Bobcats this season that haven't been as successful in those scenarios as Iona and even the Ryder Bronx. So I'm going to take the Gales over the Bronx in the finals.
Yeah, I've got the Gales also winning the MAAC championship, but I have Quinnipiac making a run to the MAAC championship game and losing to the Iona Gales. And the difference maker for me, it was Rick Pitino. He's a Hall of Fame coach for a reason. And with the talent they've got, despite the injuries that they fought through, they still have a very, very talented backcourt. And Pitino has shown that he can make adjustments. They started off the year, they were losing some games early, Keith, and they bounced back. 17-3 in conference record is impressive.
Yeah, I'm going bold right here. As much as you heard me talk about this team having some struggles, some great, I think this team wins the MAAC. That's how far I'm going. Looking at schedule-wise, I think Marist beats Manhattan, and they swept Marist. That's a team I'm not worried about at all on Quinnipiac's side. I think Ryder and Fairfield to me a really good game. But I think Ryder beats Fairfield. And again, Quinnipiac swept them. Even though one of them was well, Dwight Murray Jr., they still beat them double overtime. That's a team I'm not too concerned about for the Quinnipiac side. The Iona Gales is going to be a really good team. But I also want to be shocked if they get upset by Canisius and Mount St. Mary's. I still think they make the championship. But I think Quinnipiac Bobcats have had success with Rick Pitino's squad. They beat them once, and they lost a double-digit lead once again earlier in the year. But I think this team is going to have a chip on the shoulder. If they get those 2 wins, they're going to feel even better being a good team. Because I think Siena and Niagara won't be great teams to win overall. for Iona. Their momentum will be that good. I think Quinnipiac will have great momentum going to the championship game and could pull off an upset. So that's why they're going to go dancing for the first time. That's my take.
Keith, I just think the blown double-digit leads, it's an issue. And like you mentioned in Iona game, Rick Pitino made adjustments. That was the difference. So I just see that happening again in the MAAC championship.
Yeah, it's something you got to just take a risk on. The team is streaky. You've seen it all season long. That's something you got to take. I think Quinnipiac is going to catch fire at the perfect time. I think they're going to be a 15th seed in the NCAA tournament. I'm going far. I believe that the talent is here. We know the talent is here. They've had success against all the teams that they have a good chance. Listen, if Niagara somehow makes the championship, I don't think they'd be Niagara. I'm still concerned about that team. But I think it's going to be a miracle run, and they win the MAAC tournament.
Well, Keith, I got Iona and Ryder in the final. I just don't see Quinnipiac 3 times in a row being Ryder. I just don't think it's going to happen. And if we saw with the last game, even with double overtime, they could have lost that game. It could have been a very different story of them even being in the 3 seed right now. They're even lucky to be there, in my opinion, at the 3 spot. So there's a lot to find out this next coming week. But with that, our time is up for tonight. Thank you to our great beat reporter staffs and to everyone behind the scenes for making the show possible. To follow more Q30 content throughout the MAAC postseason, as well as our weekly shows, Sports Pause and Bobcat Breakdown, visit our website, q30tv.com, and follow us on Twitter at Q30Sports. I've been your host, Dylan Summer. Good night from Hamden.